I'm so happy we have our spooky music for October because we are talking about a very scary topic today, student loans. It's the ultimate skeleton in the closet. And I know when I got my student loans after grad school, $164,000 of student loans, I was very anxious. I learned everything about student loans. I'm literally such a student loan nerd. And there used to not be a lot of high quality content and information out there, even from government websites, until I found Student Loan Planner. 3 or 4 years ago, I started following Student Loan Planner, and they have such high quality information and take into consideration so many things that I just had to bring them on the podcast at some point. I have been wanting to bring them on since we started this podcast, so I can't even describe how excited I am to talk to them today. Me too, Sammy. I'm so excited to speak with their team today. Becca is a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to just throw some questions at her and get some ideas about how to start planning for your student loans. Keep in mind, this episode is coming out in October, which is when the student loan repayments are starting again in the United States. So we thought this would be the perfect time to have this conversation. If you have student loans, if your mom has student loans, if your brother or sister or niece or child has student loans, this is if your partner has student loans. Ooh, yeah, if your partner has student loans. If you're wondering what you need to talk about on your next date, just kidding, maybe not you. But everybody else, I think you're going to find a lot of really interesting information in this podcast. We get into the technical, and we cannot wait to have this conversation with Becca. So let's get into it. We are so excited to have Becca Baldauf on our podcast today with Build a Wealthy Spirit. Becca is a CPA and certified college financial consultant who navigated the financial aid process on her own. She uses her personal experience and professional expertise to help student loan borrowers set themselves up for their best financial future. She knows firsthand how overwhelming this process can be and aims to meet people where they are, while helping them achieve milestones they previously believed to be impossible. Becca, thank you so much for joining us today on Build a Wealthy Spirit.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share what I know with your audience.
Thank you, Becca. And before we get into student loans, do you want to tell us a little bit about your personal student loan journey?
Yeah, so actually when I was going to college, I thought I was setting myself up for this really much easier path. I'd seen my sisters go take out a ton of student loans and wanted to avoid that as much as I could. And so I actually was able to finish my undergrad a year early. For CPAs, you actually have to have an extra year, a fifth year, 150 credit hours to be able to sit for the CPA exam. So in the same amount of time that most people are finishing up their undergrad, I was able to get all of those 150 credit hours done. So I was like, I'm winning. I'm avoiding a whole year of tuition. This is great. By the time that I was in school and everything, the interest rates had risen pretty crazily. So my federal student loans were at 6.75% when I had consolidated. And I went to a 4-year private school. And so I had my family was middle class growing up. And so I did end up having to take out private student loans as well. So I had private and federal to deal with. When I graduated, I consolidated all of my federal student loans to get on the best path to forgiveness. And really the name of the game when you have private and federal student loans is prioritizing paying off those private student loans first and making sure that you can address that. And then as far as the federal student loans, you want to keep your payment as low as possible with the income-driven repayment options. Honestly, the federal student loan system, there's a whole strategy behind that and getting those payments as low as possible so that you do not have to sacrifice, other things that you want in life. Your loans don't have to control you. That's really the crux of where my student loans kind of originated from. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you guys have kind of based off that information I just shared.
I love that, Becca, because I think a lot of people, they worry about trying to make sure everything's so perfect, or they worry that they've already done something wrong. And I think it's all about just starting to make a plan. Let's say someone is starting to approach paying off their student loans. What do you think are some of the bigger factors to consider right away?
So from a federal student loan perspective, if they're just starting, I would say that consolidating as soon as you get out of school is definitely in your best interest, and getting on one of those income-driven repayment plans so that you are charting that path to making, the 20 or 25-year forgiveness accessible. So that's really, step number one is starting that forgiveness clock. And then step number two is really managing that payment and making it something that you can work with your budget and your lifestyle and things that you want to accomplish as well.
And I wanted to just pull something out for our listeners, because when we hear about consolidation, I know being a healthcare provider, I have public loans like through the government, but I'll get all these consolidation emails from like SoFi or other companies that want you to consolidate and make your loans private. But I know now there's also public consolidation. So could you talk a little bit about that difference for our listeners too?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a pretty common misconception. And it is confusing because there are consolidations for like just personal debt consolidation and in the form of personal loans. So I think that's where the confusion comes in. But realistically, consolidation is a term, as far as student loans go, very specific only to federal student loans. Anything from like SoFi or other, I don't necessarily want to mention any specific lenders here, but from private financial institutions, that's actually considered a refinance, not a consolidation. So it's completely taking it out of the federal student loan system and refinancing it, not consolidation.
Okay, see, that's so helpful. Why is consolidation so important? Because that would just mean just turning all your individual loans into one big loan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through the government. And why not just leave them as individual loans?
One, it's going to simplify things a lot as far as, especially if you are on the path to forgiveness, whether it's through public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment, that 20 or 25-year clock. It really just simplifies everything, puts it into one unsubsidized and one subsidized loan. Through that process, that's what starts the clock towards forgiveness. And it's a necessary step. Like, you have to do that in order to be able to access that forgiveness.
And Becca, I want to also focus in on something, because you keep mentioning forgiveness. And I think that there's a lot of confusion, especially right now with talks of the government forgiving the loans, or there's so many different programs. What specifically are you referring to when you're talking about starting the clock towards forgiveness?
Yeah, so with public service loan forgiveness, which is a subset of the federal student loan system, that would be 120 qualifying payments. And you would have to work for a nonprofit or government entity in order to be able to access that. There are a few more steps involved in that process as far as, filing an annual employer certification to get those qualifying payments certified. With income-driven forgiveness, income-driven repayment forgiveness, that's a 20 or 25-year clock, and you would have to be on an eligible payment plan. The ineligible payment plans would be standard, extended, or extended graduated. If you're on any of those plans, you're not counting any time towards that forgiveness clock. Unless you consolidate before the end of 2023, because there is a very unique opportunity with the one-time income-driven repayment account adjustment. There's a lot of moving pieces here.
Yes, and I want to put a big star on what you just said here, because I think a lot of people, I know when I first had my student loans, for me, they automatically put you on that standard loan repayment plan, which is not going to make you eligible for any of these plans unless, during these time periods where they have a period where they start to accept you. But for the most part, you're not eligible for those plans. And I think a lot of people who are not working in the public sector don't realize that they actually also have a way to qualify for loan forgiveness. And like you said, it's not the 10-year loan forgiveness, but you can still qualify in the long term for loan forgiveness if you haven't paid it off. In what was the time frame you said?
So it depends on which of the repayment plans that you elect. But generally speaking, it's 20 or 25 years. If you have any form of graduate debt and you're on IBR, income-based repayment, or SAVE, the new plan that replaced revised pay as you earn, If you're on SAVE or IBR, those are 25-year clocks for forgiveness.
When you're taking a look at your student loans, does the amount that you owe affect which direction you should think about moving towards?
It depends on your goals, really. So if your focus is to, keep that low payment for a federal student loan, you'll want to be on an income-driven repayment plan, and the balance of the loans does not play into that at all. The only thing that influences your payment is your current, really the previous year's income from your tax return. So that's the other reason that it's really important to do that consolidation as soon as you're done with school and submit your income-driven repayment, because chances are that your income's going to be a lot lower when you were, a student, your last year of school or residency or anything. Any form of training program, that would be really important to kind of capitalize on that time frame and lock in that really low payment for the next 12 months.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there probably are some people who have, a loan amount that maybe is so low it may be worth them paying it off. If someone's wondering if they should pay it off or do the forgiveness, what's some ways you recommend them thinking about it?
As far as their low debt amount, you're saying, the principal balance?
Yeah, maybe they only have like $20,000 or $10,000 and they're wondering, should I pay this off? Would there be any reason for them to try to do forgiveness in that case?
There would actually, especially with the SAVE program, with the income-driven repayment. So the SAVE program has this new aspect that was introduced and not available on the other income-driven repayment plans. And if you had $12,000 or less of student loans that were borrowed from the federal government, they'll actually forgive that amount, the $12,000, in only 10 years.
Wow.
And then for any additional $1,000 after that, it's just one more year. So if they do have something like as low as like $20,000, that's something to consider for sure, because, that would make, so $20,000, that would only be 18 years instead of 20.
Okay, so this is important because this is new. So if you were somebody who maybe didn't have a big loan amount, let's say maybe you had $20,000 and you've been working, if you now apply for the SAVE program, would it be starting now once you apply for the SAVE program, or does it include time from before or no?
So it only includes time in repayment. That's what counts towards forgiveness.
Okay.
So as soon as you have loans in repayment, the other thing to consider is that you can actually, specifically for grad plus loans. So if you have listeners that are, still in school finishing up a graduate program, they can ask to have the in-school deferment waived and start their clock while they're still in school.
Oh, wow.
And then COVID has ended. Those COVID benefits, like not having to pay, not having interest accrual, those are actually gone now, or they will be going away. What dates are important for our listeners to know now?
Yeah, so repayments are starting again in October of 2023. That one-time income-driven repayment account adjustment that I mentioned, that's expiring at the end of 2023. So you would want to make sure that you get any consolidations done prior to then, at which point it'll ask you to select a repayment plan when you do that consolidation. You can still elect the standard or extended graduated plans there as well. Generally, what we find is that going the income-driven repayment route is generally in folks' best interest. So the October date, the December date. The other big one in the next year or so is in July of 2024. One of the income-driven repayment plans, if you're not already enrolled in it, it's actually not going to allow you to enroll in it moving forward. That's the pay-as-you-earn plan, PAYE. And that one actually that is a 20-year forgiveness clock, even if you have graduate loans. So that's something to consider if people want to have a shorter time frame for that forgiveness and be making payments, not as long. Those are, I would say, the big ones in the next few years. There's also one to consider for Parent Plus borrowers. So the only thing I'll mention for the Parent Plus loans are that there is something called a double consolidation loophole. And with that, they're taking away that loophole in July of 2025. That would generally be executed in order to be able to access more advantageous income-driven repayment options, because if they were to just do one consolidation, not the double consolidation, the only income-driven repayment option available to them is the income contingent repayment option, which is 20% of your discretionary income. It's the most expensive of the 4 income-driven repayment options. And to be honest, we try to avoid it at all costs because it's just generally not in our client's best interest.
That makes complete sense.
Becca, I'm wondering, we're talking a lot about sort of different options people have in terms of like the technical aspect of student loan repayment. I'm sure you also get a lot of people who come to Student Loan Planner who are just mentally very stressed, overwhelmed. And I find that to be a common theme, even when I'm talking to my friends or coworkers. Like student loans, it's like something that weighs so heavily on people. Is there anything that you say to the people who come to you or who might be in that mindset in terms of maybe having some hope or some reassurance?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, in our consultations, I would say like a picture is worth 1,000 words. Like even though we're not on camera, we usually walk them through their very specific situation. And generally, like the narratives that we build up in our heads are so much more powerful than what the reality is of the situation and the control that we do actually have. So as soon as we show them that they have options and they're the ones that are, dictating what happens here, and all they need to do is tell us their goals beyond their student loans, and we will do everything that we can to help them get there. That's really eye-opening for people. And it really is just like, you feel like you have these handcuffs on, but like you're the one holding the key. You can take them off at any point.
That's so true. It's funny because if you go outside to people who don't know anything about student loans, everybody just tells you to like pay off aggressively, and they know nothing about your goals. They know nothing about your situation. They know nothing about whether there's better options for you. Like sometimes I think in my head, I'm like, them saying that to you could cost this person like millions of dollars because they could have been doing a forgiveness plan and investing their money instead. So I think it's really important to consider the options, and it's a lot of information. So if it's overwhelming for people, definitely seeking out something like you guys, like Student Loan Planner, to help you come up with a plan for yourself.
Yeah, and to your point, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that can be really frustrating for people because they're like, I just don't know who to listen to.
Yeah.
But that's why we do what we do, because we want to make sure that people are getting the advice that they need that's, tailored to their specific goals and their situation.
It's so true. And I feel like in any kind of scenario where I'm overly stressed about something, especially when it comes to finance and personal finances, I always find that facing it and like starting the journey, taking that first step helps so much more. Because to your point, the narrative, when you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I have to think about it. It's coming up. I'm just going to deal with it next month. Oh my gosh, I just heard all this stuff is going on. Do I need to factor in 10 more things? That's way more stressful than just starting to take those first steps.
100%.
And I wanted to ask you, with the loan payments restarting, I think a lot of people are wondering, like, what's going to happen if I can't make a payment? Like, are they going to get in trouble? Are they going to end up defaulting their loans? Like, what happens now?
Yeah, so there is this thing called the on-ramp period that has been introduced with payments restarting. The government has recognized that not everyone's in the same place financially since this pause. And so the on-ramp is really preventing really the worst consequences as far as your loans being put into default. When your loans are put into default, you don't have access to those income-driven repayment plans. They'll work with you, but it's a lot more complicated to kind of get out of that. And then you're almost like putting yourself even, further behind the starting line by doing that. Even if you can't make payments, you can also put them into forbearance, especially through the end of this year. That will actually count towards your repayment timeframe because of that one-time IDR account adjustment. Because they've been in continuous forbearance for all of COVID, those few months just get tacked on. So if you need to wait until 2024 to make payments, make sure that you actively elect to put yourself into forbearance so that time still counts as being in repayment under the one-time IDR account adjustment.
Okay, yeah, so that's super important. So this would be for people who, not for public loan forgiveness, I'm guessing, because you'd still, well, I guess as long as you're working for the public loan company.
Yeah.
So that's huge. So you could technically go into forbearance at least until
December. Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're working for your employer that's a nonprofit, then you're okay as far as getting those payments approved.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody who's not in the public sector, then you would still be okay for the longer forgiveness plans, but just not the public service loan forgiveness.
Yeah, so it would count as time and repayment for public service loan forgiveness as long as, to your point, you're working for that qualifying employer. and then also for income-driven repayment forgiveness as well.
And it sounds like a part of that too, like let's say you're somebody who recently lost your job or left your job for some reason, or don't have an income right at this moment for some reason. This is also something that they should pay attention to, because it doesn't mean that they need to start repaying right away in October. They can actually take action to go into forbearance.
Yep, they can do that. The other thing that I do want to kind of expand upon based on what you said, as far as, if they are in a situation where they lost their job or they're switching careers or employers, you can actually do a strategic income recertification to get your payment recalculated. So if you're in between jobs, if you're on leave for some reason, you can go ahead and go through the income-driven repayment application, and there'll be a question specifically that says, has your income significantly decreased since you filed your last tax return? You would say yes to that, and then it'll give you an option to submit alternative documentation attesting to what your current income is, and they'll base your payment calculation off of that.
Yes, and this is what I just did because I started my sabbatical, so I'm going to be off for a few months. So I did a recertification of my income. So even though it will count for public service loan forgiveness because I'm not working, at least I won't have a payment over these next few months. So that's nice. I did want to talk about the new SAVE plan that just came out, because I know you can't go into all the details, but to just give the people an idea of what this new SAVE plan is.
Yeah, so the SAVE plan really offers a very unique opportunity, specifically in regards to the way that interest is treated. So it is an income-driven repayment plan similar to the other repayment plans. So pay, income-based repayment, income contingent repayment are the other ones. But with SAVE, the biggest, most immediate difference is what they consider, like the amount of income that they protect and, shield from the calculation for your monthly payment. So all of the other income-driven repayment plans, they will utilize there's like the federal poverty line, and that's the amount of income that they'll deduct from whatever's on your tax return and say, okay, we're not going to consider this, like you obviously need some money to live. All those other income-driven repayment plans utilize that times 150%, whereas SAVE protects more of it. It uses 225% of that level. So it's protecting more of your income relative to the payment calculation initially. The other really big and interesting component that's new and also different from the other repayment plans is the way that interest is treated. So once they calculate that monthly payment, after that payment is made and applied to your loan, if there's any remaining accrued interest that's not paid by your monthly payment, they waive that. So your balance isn't growing over time. You're not sacrificing progress in time and repayment for the amount of the loan balance and what may ultimately be forgiven.
That's huge. That's something that I worried about. And that's something that even the previous IBR plans didn't account for, right? Because I know when I was on income-based repayment, sometimes I wouldn't have interest accrue because I paid enough into the plan, and sometimes I would have interest accrue still because the 10 or 15% that I had to pay of my income didn't cover the interest. So this is interesting because even if you're paying a really low amount and it doesn't cover your interest, you won't have, it won't grow more. That's correct?
Correct, yes. And that is applied on a monthly basis. Another common question that we get is, will I have to pay forgiveness on that monthly waived interest? And the answer is no, you do not.
Oh, okay. So quick question coming out of these plans a little bit, or maybe not, is for people who are doing the loan forgiveness that's not the public service loan forgiveness, before, when it was time for forgiveness, whatever was remaining that was going to be forgiven, they would get taxed on that. Is that still true?
That is still true. So under the American Rescue Plan that was passed during COVID, they actually made student loan forgiveness tax-free, but only through 2025.
Oh.
And so the common belief amongst our industry is that component being part of the regulation that was passed, that was essentially a down payment or a promise to make that a more permanent fixture moving forward. If you're estimated to get forgiveness just after that 2025 timeframe, I wouldn't necessarily fret about it. We always like to prepare our clients for worst case scenario. So we do include kind of an estimation of what that quote unquote tax bomb will be. at that point of forgiveness for them based off of their individual balance that would be forgiven. And we tell them, what to, save on a monthly basis and what to invest on a monthly basis in addition to their payment to be able to meet that obligation.
Would you mind clarifying too, Becca, for anyone who is new to the idea of forgiveness, what exactly is the tax bomb that people are sort of planning for?
Yeah, so that tax bomb, it would be on the amount forgiven on an income-driven repayment plan. And that's from a federal perspective that we generally refer to that. There are states that they'll follow the federal definition of whatever is considered income, but there are certain states that even if federally it's passed and tax-free, from a state perspective, you may still be taxed on the amount of whatever remaining amount of the loan that's forgiven after that 20 or 25-year period. I do want to clarify, though, that for public service loan forgiveness, all of the forgiveness is tax-free, regardless of what year it is.
So if you're in the 10-year PSLF program, working for a nonprofit, you wouldn't have to worry about being taxed on what was forgiven.
Yes.
But it is something to keep in mind if you're in the 20-year income-based.
Yes, income-driven. The only reason I make that distinction is because under the umbrella of income-driven repayment, income-based repayment is one of the options.
Got it.
Yeah, so just, to make it more confusing, everything is a synonym of each other. We just want to, keep people confused.
That's a good point, because when I was just talking to my loan servicer, literally I was not understanding her because I was using income-based and income-driven equivalently, so that's helpful. So there's a good point there, though. If you are someone who's been working not in the public sector and you're eligible for this 20-year loan forgiveness, and maybe you haven't acted on your loans until now, you want to get it together if you would be forgiven in 2024 or 2025, because that would be before potentially things could change as far as the taxes go.
Yeah, for sure. Or like if you're somebody that's only 10 years into repayment, and then you want to totally switch it up and go work for a nonprofit, you can still get forgiveness in the same timeline, but you can guarantee that you're going to get it tax-free.
That's true.
Yeah. If you could tell us about the student loan forgiveness calculator that you guys have on your website, because I find it so helpful.
Yeah, I can expand on that a little bit. The biggest difference between that and the simulator on the federal studentaid.gov website, I think that those are generally the most questions that we get is like, why am I seeing different things between what the federal site's showing me and what your calculator is showing? So reason number one is because that loan simulator, even though all of your information is, if you're logged in and running it that way, all of your loans are feeding it directly, it's still assuming that your whatever forgiveness date, it's calculating based off of the assumption that you're just starting repayment day one. So it's not going to show you an accurate forgiveness date, number one, regardless of when you entered repayment, unless you just graduated in May of 2023, chances are it's not going to give you an accurate timeline to plan for that. But we do get a little bit more detailed. I do think that the loan simulator has come a long way on the federal student loan website, but we try to be a lot more nuanced as far as considering, your adjusted gross income, which is exactly what your payment is calculated on if you're, linking to your tax return and everything, as well as, different options that you may have to reduce that AGI moving forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the craziest things for me to see was that on this new save plan, how much cheaper my payments would have been. And it looks like for probably 90, most people, it will be cheaper. I did see there's a small portion of people where this may be more expensive. Is that right?
Yeah. So the only drawback with the save plan is that your payment does escalate with your income, whereas the other income-driven repayment plans have caps. They'll max out, your payment would max out at whatever your standard payment amount would have been if you were not on an income-driven repayment plan. So that's something to consider for sure, which really only affects, I would say, extremely high earners, or if you're in a situation where if you're married, filing separately doesn't necessarily make sense for you, or you're just not open to it. Filing jointly inflates your income as far as taking into account both spouses. But yeah, it's, I would say, a very small percentage of folks.
Becca, everything you've told us so far has been super, super helpful. It sounds like if somebody is listening to this, if they have student loans, it's really, really good to take some time, do a little bit of research, start to put a plan together. because there's a lot of opportunities where making a small pivot can really save people potentially hundreds and thousands of dollars. And so facing the music, I think, is going to be beneficial to everybody. And especially right now, being strategic can really help people. And if they are looking for someone to work with, if they're in a situation where it's overwhelming, it's really nice to know that there are companies like Student Loan Planner out there. I wanted to shift a little bit. One question or a theme that came up with a lot of people who listen to our podcast when we told them that we were bringing you onto the podcast was the question of, how do I start thinking about college payments for my child? I'd be curious to know if there's any recommendations for parents who are considering wanting to help out their children when they go to higher education.
Yeah, that's a great question. So specifically, I think one of the themes that we see is that borrowers feel like they need to almost put off saving for the future in order to make payments on their student loans or make more significant progress right now. Specifically for federal student loan borrowers. So I mentioned that adjusted gross income. So one of the things that you can do, one, to reduce your student loan payment in your taxable income, number 2, and then number 3, save for your financial future, is if you have an employer-sponsored retirement plan, like a 403B or a 401k, you can actually put up to, in 2023, $22,500 into that plan. And a lot of people here max out my retirement plan contributions and they stop at whatever the employer match for that is, when really the ceiling for that is much higher. That's, I would say, rule number 1, relative to kind of getting on your own life vest first. We hear the spiel when we're on planes about put your own air mask on first, then attend to your child. What people don't realize relative to student loans and then also paying for their children's education or for planning for that is that you can actually take distributions from your retirement account, and they're considered qualified distributions to pay for your children's education. There's no tax penalty or anything with that. So it's really a win all the way around.
Wow.
As far as, especially if they, we don't know if our kids are gonna decide to even go to college. The world could look completely different by that time too. So it's really a smart financial maneuver, I would say, relative to people that have student loans and also preventing their kids from being in the same situation.
You make such a really great point there. For anyone who's looking at the income-driven repayment options, if you contribute to a pre-tax vehicle like a 401k or something along those lines, you actually reduce your income. Thus, you also reduce your income payment, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which is great because we're also big fans of contributing to your 401k, putting things in those pre-tax vehicles. It's great for anybody's financial future. And it's awesome to hear that if you have children and you're thinking about how you want to contribute or help them in the future, it could actually help them as well.
And I wanted to ask you one question before we start to close up here, because I did have a lot of people asking me. I worked in California before, and in California, it's pretty common for healthcare workers. If you work at the hospital, which is a nonprofit, you might work for a private group that works for the hospital. So there's no direct way for that person to work at the nonprofit hospital because it's another company that works for the hospital. And I've been hearing rumors that those people still qualify for public loan service forgiveness. Is that true?
That is true. And we're seeing it every day. So one of the big employers in California that you mentioned, or I should say contractors for the hospital systems in California is Kaiser Permanente. We have had a huge influx of Kaiser Permanente folks booking with us because there are literally physicians that have been working there, paying on their student loans for 20, 25 plus years that are getting immediate forgiveness because all they have to do is consolidate their loans, file their public service loan forgiveness employer certification, and they're done.
Wow. It almost makes me want to cry because I feel like I know so many people in this scenario who have been working for a nonprofit. Before, it was people who didn't realize that they qualified for public loan service forgiveness. So just realizing that they do and then just submitting that one sheeter paper can completely forgive them. But now it extends to all these people who thought that they could not qualify. So if it's you or if you know somebody who is working for a nonprofit, but the person who technically employs them is private, they should probably at least try to submit this and see if they can get approval.
Definitely.
Yeah, and definitely if you're in healthcare, we have so many people who listen to this who fall under that umbrella. I feel like it's double important to check on that or tell a friend or a parent, because Sammy and I have seen it where people have come to realize that they've been working at the shop sometimes for 30 years and they've qualified for student loan forgiveness.
The big loophole for that is the reason that it's, here now is because those states have very specific rules where they can't have direct employees. The nonprofit can't have direct employees. So that's really the crux of what that opportunity is.
I said I didn't have any more questions, but I do have one more question just because a lot of people have been asking me this too. So a lot of people that I know have worked for a nonprofit before they went to grad school, and they were maybe paying loans at that time, but they didn't accumulate all their grad school loans. In that case, if those people consolidate, does that apply to all their loans, or how does that work?
So that's a very good example of people who should definitely consolidate before the end of 2023, because even though they hadn't even taken out their graduate loans yet, they can get all of their loans. So with this one-time adjustment, they're giving the highest amount of credit for time and repayment to all of their loans. So they can pull the forgiveness timeline, or date, I should say, forward for those grad loans by consolidating them with the undergrad loans. And through the end of 2023, they can still get that, really generous retroactive credit for public service loan forgiveness as well.
Wow. So if someone has been working in a nonprofit, but they also worked at a nonprofit, let's say before they went to grad school, they can actually count that time towards their repayment period.
Yeah, as long as they were making payments on their undergraduate loans while they were working for that nonprofit before grad school, absolutely.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of our listeners, because I know for a lot of programs, for example, like my physician assistant program, I worked as a nurse assistant at the hospital. And I was paying loans, but only my undergraduate loans because I didn't have grad school loans yet. And then now I've been working for however many years. If I consolidate, we can go all the way back from the undergrad loans, even though I didn't even have those grad school loans, and it will apply to all the loans as far as my forgiveness calculator. So that's huge. That's going to affect a lot of people as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Becca, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such an interesting conversation. Student loans, I think, are just such a stressor for so many people. And I feel like as we're coming towards this, this episode will come out at the beginning of October. So I'm seeing things online and Twitter and stuff where people are like, anybody else freaking out now that repayments are starting or payments are starting? And it's so great to be able to have a resource and have somebody that knows so much about the student loan program, especially as it's constantly changing. So thank you so much for joining us today. Are there any final thoughts on your end around student loans or payments that maybe we didn't talk about today or that you wanted to include?
I don't want to confuse people any more than I may have already. I understand that this is super technical. So the one call to action I would have is that if you still are feeling super confused, please don't hesitate to reach out to Student Loan Planner. It's what we're here for. We want to make sure that we're getting you a plan that works for your individual situation. And we're available at studentloanplanner.com/book. And we've onboarded a ton of consultants so that we can, meet the demand of this time, especially through year end. I guess that would also be the one thing is take a look at it before year end. Don't have this be a 2024 resolution. Get it done now, because otherwise you'll miss the boat.
Yes. And I'm so glad you came on. I've been following Student Loan Planner for years. I've been super into my own loans. I always go to you guys as a resource because having done my own research, I'll watch other places talk about loans, even sometimes the government videos and stuff, and they don't understand all the nuance like you guys do. So yes, it's an investment to have a consult, but it can save you tens of thousands of dollars. It is a small investment compared to what it can save you. And it's one of those things where I want to bring you guys on because I genuinely think it could save our listeners hundreds, if not not even if we group everybody together, millions. It is something that can really help people save money and create a plan where they can also live a decent life and take care of their student loans. So thank you so much, Becca, for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having us and for inviting me here today. It was awesome, talking with you guys, and happy to do so again because I'm sure the changes will just keep coming.
Yes, we would love to.
Yes, it was such a joy to have you, Becca. And I definitely think, especially if this ends up sparking more questions, we definitely will reach out again because new things pop out of nowhere, it seems sometimes. And so it's just so helpful to have someone to chat about with it. So all of the links mentioned, they'll be in our show notes in buildawealthyspirit.com and our newsletter as well. Becca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Takeaways.
Takeaways for this episode. Sammy, it was so great to have Becca on with us today. I thought she just had a wealth of knowledge when it comes to student loans, the changes that are happening, how to make a plan for it. I just loved it. I thought this conversation was super informative and I learned a lot myself.
I had so much fun asking Becca all my questions, and she has so much knowledge. I think we just learned so much, and I know it may sound dramatic to some of you, but I really do think that if y'all, our listeners, follow these plans, literally, as a podcast, we together can save thousands or even millions of dollars on student loans.
That was my biggest takeaway, Sammy. Take action. Make a plan. Things are changing. If you're listening to this when this comes out, we're launching this in October, which is aligned with when repayments start again. So make a plan.
And it is really important, from what she was saying, to kind of decide whether you are going to try to take the path of paying off your loans aggressively, or if you're going to try to take the path of qualifying for forgiveness, whether that's public loan service forgiveness or whether that is just the regular loan service forgiveness options that are available to everybody.
Yes. And another takeaway as a part of that, Sammy, the new SAVE program is opening up a lot of opportunities for people who either hadn't necessarily prepared for this in the past, or in the past thought they didn't qualify for loan forgiveness, but actually do.
Exactly, Michelle. I can think of 3 main groups of people that this is going to be huge for. 1, if you're a healthcare worker who works at a nonprofit, but you're technically employed by a for-profit company. You may qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So you may have been working there for 10 years, thought you didn't qualify, and actually you qualify. All you have to do is fill out that 1-sheeter employment certification and you could be forgiven.
It's so crazy, Sammy, because I can list off multiple people who listen to this podcast who work at Kaiser, who work at Sutter, who I already know this could have a big impact for them.
Exactly. The second group of people is people who are just regular people working normal jobs. They're not working at a nonprofit, but because of the SAVE plan, their payments will be so low that going towards regular forgiveness will be cheaper than them paying off their loan. And then especially these people who have $20,000 of loan or less, or could be more, but it sounds like especially in those lower loan amounts, they may even still benefit from something like the SAVE plan because they could qualify for 10-year forgiveness even if they are not at a nonprofit. So that's a big category of people as well. And the final thing that I found really helpful that I think will help a lot of people is for people who worked at a nonprofit before they had their grad loans and they were paying their undergrad loans while working at a nonprofit, they can consolidate all their loans, and that forgiveness timeline for the undergrad will apply to all of those loans. That's so huge. I know so many people who worked as lab techs or scribes or nurse assistants at a nonprofit before they went to PA school. This literally would apply to them and potentially make it so that they could be forgiven as soon as now.
And as a reminder,
this is not financial advice.
This is not financial advice. We wanted to bring Becca on so that she could help provide a perspective and get you to think, if you have student loans, are there things that you can do to make changes? At the same time, every person's situation is unique. Truly, where you work now, where you worked in the past, what you've been paying. There are so many different factors at play. Your personal goals, your values. Those things are all important. So I would say the number one thing is to start to make a plan and reach out to a resource like Student Loan Planner if that starts to become a little overwhelming, or if you want someone to be able to talk to so that you can make the right decision. We are a general podcast. We can only cover so much, but we hope that this can help you start to think about things that maybe you hadn't considered before.
Amen, Michelle. I have been plotting on meeting with Student Loan Planner myself because I'm super into this, but I'm like, I know that there's so much out there. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing and see if there's anything else I could be doing. And I know it may seem like a bit of investment to have that initial consult, but when it's something like this where it's so nuanced, it can literally save you tens of thousands. Or if you consider the amount that you could be saving and investing instead of putting towards a loan, it could save you potentially millions of dollars. So they're super busy, but if it applies to you, it's worth trying to book a spot.
And I'm curious, if you listen to this podcast, obviously we'd love to know if you had any insights, if there were any aha moments for you. buildawealthyspirit.com. You can leave us a comment. Also, if you have more questions, if something came up that sparked another question in your mind, if this was interesting, we'd love to bring Becca back on. We'd love to talk a little bit more about this. So if there are more questions that you have that we weren't able to get today, let us know.
Community time!
Before we say goodbye, it's our community time.
Yes, we wanted to do some shout outs to our community. People who did let us know that they enjoyed our last episode. We talked about the friendship recession, the loneliness epidemic, and how to build community. I love the comments that we got on this episode. Sean shared on buildawealthyspirit.com. Love the friend database. I did something similar during cohort 10 of Rite of Passage. There was a connect tab in Google Sheets to help me break out of the shyness shell. I had 2 other columns of intent and action that helped me be pretty intentional. And I love this. He said, day 2 of the sheet had Michelle listed as a contact to reach out to, with the simple intent of saying, thank you for writing something that inspired me to take action. Sean, that is so lovely. I love to hear that. Sean and I met during Rite of Passage, and I remember him reaching out to me and sending a comment. And it was such a great way to be reminded of the conversation that we had. Second comment from Louie, enjoyed this one. We do need creative solutions to this loneliness epidemic. It's already bad and does not feel like it's going to get better with smaller families and people having less kids. Louis, I totally agree. Community is so different today than it was even 20 or 30 years ago, and there's so many reasons for that. Thank you guys for listening. You guys can also leave us a comment, buildawealthyspirit.com. We'd love to shout you out in our community time.
And most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rule book and we rethink the status quo.